Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the College Sports Hive. Once again, that is Leif and I'm Scott Stevens, and we're coming to you live to bring you a recap of what transpired this weekend throughout the landscape of the college football season. Um, there wasn't any ranked matchups this weekend, but there was a lot of intriguing matchups that we could have seen some swing momentum plays happen and things like that. It turned out that there were a lot of the games we thought the favorites were ended up dominating and having good performances, but these are the kinds of weeks that determines who's fit and who is unfit to play in for a college football championship berth and things like that. So there's still a lot to talk about and dive into. So we're going to recap 4 of the games that we previewed for you. We're going to do Notre Dame at Boston College, Arkansas at Florida, Indiana at Michigan State, Wisconsin and at Michigan. And then we'll talk about a few other things that we saw throughout the course of this slate of games. And one of those things is going to be the USC team that squeaked out with another win to get to 2-0, but it wasn't pretty again. Oregon survived an upset bid in Pullman against Washington State. Northwestern improved to 4-0, so we'll touch on them in the Big Ten West. The Utah game got canceled again on the Friday before the game was supposed to happen, so that was an intriguing matchup. And a game was rescheduled with UCLA that they were supposed to play, so some intriguing news there to touch on. Liberty and Marshall stayed undefeated. And lastly, we'll touch on Cincinnati and what's kind of going on with them and in the grand scheme of things in their run for a potential group of 5 college football playoff berth. So, and then as always, we'll wrap up with pick results and we'll see where Leif and I are at throughout 4 weeks now of doing this for all of you. So with that being said, we'll delve right into our recaps. And the first game we're going to start with is number 2 Notre Dame traveling to Boston College. This was a game that was close for a while. It kind of went back and forth. We expected Boston College to compete. I actually took them to win the football game, which was probably unwise. But Notre Dame did end up winning this game 45-31. I do believe the most important part of this game for Notre Dame was the performance of Ian Book. I think this was his most complete game as a Notre Dame quarterback in his career. So let's start there. And what did you make of his performance and what he did there for the Irish?
Yeah, I agree. I've watched a fair amount of Notre Dame football, and I think that was his best, most complete performance. It wasn't against the best team, but he played a great game against a team that was certainly up to the challenge. And I thought a big thing was when Notre Dame fell behind early, and then there was a big character test. I was worried, like, okay, maybe they'll fold. The pressure's too much being the number 2 team in the nation coming off of a big win. And then they came back and scored. Kyron Williams did his thing. Ian Book dominated to the tune of 20 for 27, 283 yards, 3 touchdowns through the air, and then 85 yards and a TD scamper as well. I thought their line did their thing. That was predictable. Their defense tightened up after what I'd say is a subpar first quarter, and they look legit. Ian Book still has to keep this level of play and continue it because they still have games to play. They have Miami and North Carolina. So, and both those teams can score points in a hurry. And so Ian Book's play is paramount moving forward.
Yeah, it was an intriguing game for sure. I think we've touched on how dominant Ian Book was. My biggest thing is he just took care of the football. Like, he only had 7 incomplete passes, didn't throw an interception, and then when needed to, he extended the plays with his legs and ran effectively to the tune of 85 yards, like you touched on only 10 carries. So I just think that if Notre Dame is to make a run to the college football playoff like they're very much set up to do with these impressive performances, I think they need to continue building the momentum of what they've kind of established here with their offensive line, being able to run the football, not necessarily having a sincere difference maker on the outside, but having the ability to spread the ball around to multiple different targets, getting so many different people involved, catching the football, and having a ton of different options for Ian Book to throw to. So I think these performances have a chance to continue to get better and better in a way for Notre Dame as they continue to gain confidence and play at a high and elite level. And I think that will and continue to do so revolve around the play of Ian Book as a quarterback, because that team will go as far as he's able to take them, in my personal opinion. Boston College played hard. They fought for a while. They show they have the offensive talent to hang with teams like this, but they gave up 557 total yards of offense to Notre Dame, and that's just way too much.
Yeah, no, that's a lot of yards, and they put up points early, and so you got the sense it was going to be a shootout. But then Notre Dame, I mean, they forced turnovers, which was interesting. Boston College actually won the turnover battle. They forced a big fumble on Kyron Williams, and then unfortunately, right as you thought Boston College was going to make this a closer game, they had a bad snap that was recovered by Dalen Hayes of Notre Dame. And I thought that was a big turning point in the game. That when they seemed to have momentum, it was diminished so quickly and extinguished, I should say. Um, I thought Jurkovich played a decent game as well, but he didn't have the type of game Ian Book did, and he needed to be better than Book for Boston College to win.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point. Moving forward, Notre Dame is going to travel to North Carolina next weekend, which is an intriguing matchup because North Carolina is now 6-2, I believe, on the season. They've maybe 6-3. They've fallen out of the top 25, but they were up to number 5 in the country at one point this season, and they can score points with literally anyone. Howell is an extremely good quarterback. He's shown that he can throw and run for touchdowns. He's had a lot of good performances. North Carolina's defense has looked very, very suspect, giving up a ton of points in the ACC to pretty much everyone that they play. North Carolina either has to come back and win in a shootout style of a game, or it's just constant scoring throughout the game. So expect this game upcoming for North Carolina and Notre Dame to be very, very entertaining. I think it's honestly more of a sleeper game than this Notre Dame Boston College game was, but now Notre Dame's kind of off of the schneid with coming off of beating Clemson, and they don't have that whole upset scare mantra of do we lay an egg in our next game. I think Ian Book has a ton of confidence now going forward into this matchup with North Carolina, but this is a big one to look forward to next weekend in the ACC, and I think it's another potential game because with Notre Dame it just doesn't get easier like we touched on in their schedule.
Yeah, for sure. And North Carolina, Howell's a really good quarterback, but I think their most impressive position is their running back. They have 3 very, very good running backs that move the ball. They scored 59 points against Wake Forest this week, and at a point they're down 14. And I was like, wow, this is an interesting upset. And they end up going up a lot and it's putting up 60. This will be an interesting game, and I'm very curious to see what the over-under is placed for this one because Notre Dame's putting up points now too and putting up over 40 in back-to-back weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. It's gonna be a really fun one to look forward to next week, and we'll have that for you for sure on a preview episode next week moving forward. Speaking of putting up points, let's talk about Arkansas Arkansas going into number 6 Florida. Florida won this game 63-35. So almost 100 points in total scored there, 98 if my math is correct. Florida hung 63 on Arkansas without Kyle Pitts, their star tight end. He did not play with that concussion, as we touched on. But Kyle Trask did play, and boy, did he play a phenomenal football game for a tune of 23 of 29 for 356 yards and 6 total touchdowns passing football. Yes, that's 6 throwing touchdowns against.
And he didn't even finish out the game.
Against this Arkansas defense. So what did we see here from Trask to continue to improve upon his season thus far and moving him even further along in the Heisman Trophy candidacy?
I mean, we talked about it not too long ago that we thought Mac Jones and him, and then once Fields gets more games in, those are the top 3 guys, and he's just proving that. He's phenomenal. His comfort level in the pocket, they're protecting him. Even when he gets pressure, he steps away, he eludes it, and he throws to the open man. He doesn't force many balls at all. I remember they said on the broadcast, like, oh, wow, he forced that one. And then the very next play, throws a dime, just floats it into the back of the end zone with like just the utmost control. He just seems at ease, and that Florida offense is among the best in the country, if not the best in the country. And like you said, they're missing a first-round draft pick, All-American tight end, and that's their best weapon. So if you can game plan like, oh, Kyle Pitts isn't playing, we should stop Kadarius Toney, and then you go get Trevin Grimes stepped up and he had 6 catches, 109 yards, and 2 touchdowns, and they have so many weapons. I'm really high on this Florida team, and I really think they've got a chance to make the college football playoff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you said about them having all of the weapons on offense is massively important because their defense has looked suspect. Let's just be honest. I know they're probably missing still some guys from from COVID leave. We touched on they were missing 3 DBs for one of the games, but they've looked exposed, and they've definitely been able to be scored upon. They're never trailing because their offense just scores first and scores more. So it's a very interesting dynamic with this Florida team, and it's one of those things that you're starting to see more and more in the college football landscape is just excessively dominant offenses and just defenses that can't hang and just can't compete to the level that these offenses can play at. So it's really interesting to look at this Florida team and seeing the discrepancy in how well they play offense and then how much they're able to be scored upon. Because this Arkansas team did score 35 points against this Florida defense, and I wasn't expecting Florida to put up 63 points. So if you would have told me that Arkansas was going to score 35 points against Florida, I would have said they had a chance in this football game. So, but moving forward, it's just that dynamic of an offense that they have there in Gainesville. So it's what do you make of? Are they going to be able to continue that balance of just outscoring people?
I think so. I think until the SEC title game, which seems impending between them and Bama, I think they'll be able to outscore their opponents, but they certainly need to shore up their defense. There were times I was encouraged where they seemed to be able to affect Felipe Franks. They got to him a few times, but not enough. And Arkansas is an up-and-coming football team from what they have been the past few years, but they don't have the athletes of some of the teams that they'll have to be able to beat, and they need to be able to create turnovers or be a bend-don't-break defense, and I'm not seeing that from them. So that is a concern, but at least for the next few weeks, I think Florida will be in good hands, just trusting Kyle Trask and protecting him. That's the thing. If you protect Kyle Trask, you got a chance to win.
I agree with 100%. Felipe Franks did play well, but just not well enough. He was 15 of 19 for 250 yards and 2 touchdowns. Just the bottom line here in this game is that the Arkansas defense just had no answer for the high-powered efficiency of Florida. Florida racked up 593 yards of total offense. We said 550 some for Notre Dame was way too much for Boston College. So what do you make of 593 total yards, almost 6 times up and down the football field for Florida?
That's crazy. You don't even start at the 1. Like that's bizarre. Like that doesn't happen very often. I mean, the over in this game was 62, and Florida hit that by themselves. So that just speaks to how good their offense is. And I don't even think it's like we talked about in the preview that Arkansas and Florida both gave up 402 yards a game. So I thought that both teams would give up more than their average because, or at least Arkansas would, and it happened. But that's absurd. And I'm excited to see where Trask ranks when like Heisman polls, those unofficial things come out.
Where would you put him if you were those people deciding that? Where would you rank him?
I think number 1. Like I had him and Mac Jones 1A, 1B when we were talking off camera not too long ago. And I think he's just, 1, Mac Jones didn't get to play. And 2, I think Trask is doing more with less, even though they lost Jalen Waddle. I just find it more impressive that he's throwing to 6 different receivers, getting so many yards.
Yeah, we saw stats in the broadcast this week with that. I'm blanking. Oh, yeah, Joe Burrow. Him and Kyle Trask. Joe Burrow won the Heisman Trophy last season, and him and Kyle Trask have equal number of passing touchdowns through as many games as Florida has played so far this season. So, and that was a record-setting year for Joe Burrow. So truly an incredible season developing here for Florida's QB, and hopefully we continue to see him shine and push towards that Heisman Trophy candidacy. We're going to move on a little bit to another quarterback-driven team in Indiana. They won 24-0 this weekend against Michigan State. What did we make of Indiana's performance on both sides of the football this week?
Yeah, they were dominant, quite frankly. They gave up only 60 yards on the ground and forced 4 turnovers. So I thought their defense set the tone. And then your guy, Michael Penix Jr., put up a pretty solid performance. He did have 2 picks today, which was, he needs to take care of the ball, especially against Ohio State next week. But he went 25 of 38, 320 yards and 2 touchdowns. But how about the performance of Ty Freifogel? What a name, too. 11 receptions, 200 yards, and 2 TDs. So I think they've got pretty good balance. And my only concern about them is how good are the teams that they've beaten to get there. They've beaten some brand-name teams. Penn State's 0-4, though. Rutgers is 1-3. Michigan is 1-3, and Michigan State is now 1-3. So that is a concern of mine, but I'm starting to believe. I think Tom Allen's doing something special there.
It's really interesting because you look at who they've beaten and you'd be like, oh yeah, Rutgers. They're one of those teams that you usually should beat in the Big Ten. But then you look at Penn State, Michigan, and Michigan State, and you wouldn't expect an Indiana team to beat one out of those three rather than beating all three of them in the same.
That's a top 5 team most year. Like if you were to say, hey, through 4 weeks we've beaten those 3 teams, you're like, okay, you're top 5 in the country, no doubt.
Yeah, and that's just based off of the establishedness of those three programs and what has been the past few years. But you look at a Penn State team and they're just completely lost. We saw bad things happen again this week, losing to Nebraska. Michigan just got dismantled by Wisconsin in the Big House. We'll touch on that next. And then Michigan State's now 1-3, and their only win is against that sliding Michigan team. So I get it. I understand where you're coming from, and the fact that when you look at who they've beaten, their records are really bad. But I also think that just each week they continue to show a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. This week, shutting out Michigan State is very impressive. Michigan State scored 21 points. They scored more than that against Michigan. And I just think their defense is coming along and playing better football, and shutting out a team in the Big Ten is never something that should go lightly. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they keep getting better. Like you said, I saw strides on defense. I thought even against Rutgers, when they didn't shoot themselves in the foot, moved the ball well against Indiana. And Michigan was able to move the ball when they didn't shoot themselves in the foot. And then today they just stifled the run. I mean, not today, sorry, yesterday. Indiana stifled the run against Michigan State and looked a lot better and weren't reliant on mistakes, but I felt like they caused them more so than unforced errors in other games. So I'm starting to believe. I think we'll for sure have a litmus test for with Justin Fields and Ohio State at the Horseshoe. I don't necessarily believe they're going to win that game, but I don't think many teams in the country, if any, are going to win that game. So we'll see how legit they are if they can compete. I think if they can compete and actually force a good game there, they're legit.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be really intriguing next weekend because Ohio State's coming off of technically a cancellation of not being able to play against Maryland, who we were kind of excited to see that matchup with young Talia Tagovailoa, to his younger brother, there for Maryland, who's been playing just excellent football. But you're going to have an Ohio State team that's going to have a couple extra days to prepare for this matchup against Indiana, because that was announced before Friday and Saturday. So they've now turned the script to this big game coming up for Indiana. So I think it's going to be very telling if Indiana is able to actually compete in this football game. I do think they have what it takes to play Ohio State at least decently well. They have the explosiveness on offense and defense, but then again, I think Ohio State's probably one of the most complete teams in the country regardless. So a really fun one to look forward to next weekend, with Indiana traveling into Ohio State to take on the Buckeyes. Let's keep it in the Big Ten, and we touched on Wisconsin absolutely manhandling Michigan 49-11 in the Big House. They didn't show much rust coming off of that 3-week hiatus due to COVID, did they?
No, they didn't, and it didn't hurt that the very first play, the keys to the game are being read, and it says Milton has to take care of the football. And the very first play, you get a pick. And then the very next play, there's also a pick. Oh, gosh. Apologize. You get 2 picks in the first 2 throws, and that never hurts when your defense is able to do that. And then on offense, you get short fields. And from that, they set the tone. And from there, I mean, the game was over at that point. It was over at 14-0, in my opinion. And it was 28-0 at half, and it wasn't even close. There was no chance. 49-11 makes it look closer than it was, in my opinion.
It was just a complete domination by Wisconsin. There was never a doubt of who was going to win this football game once the kickoff happened. Milton came out, and his first 2 throws of the night were interceptions. Yeah, he threw the first one. Wisconsin took it down for a touchdown. He threw a second one on the second drive. Wisconsin took it down and punched in a touchdown. So you're looking at a quarterback who we said you can't rely on his arm to win you a football game. You came out and he threw 2 interceptions in the first 2 series. You're down 14-0, and then you think, oh, we can only win this game by throwing the football. So, and then he goes for a tune of 9 of 19 for only 98 yards and didn't throw a touchdown. So So it was the absolute worst case scenario if you're Michigan, to be completely honest with you. It was like we said, they needed to find their identity, and it just didn't happen. You can't spot a team like Wisconsin a 14-point lead and expect to get anywhere in the game. They're going to dominate the time of possession. They're going to run the football. They're not going to let you see the ball much in the rest of the game. Graham Mertz only had 12 completions. He was 12 of 22 for 127 yards and 2 touchdowns, and they still scored 49 points. So that should go to show about how efficient they're able to run the football against what should on paper be a very good Michigan team, even though they were missing a few pieces on the D-line, like we touched on.
One of the craziest things in this thing, I was thinking while watching that game, the first interception, I mean, I picked Wisconsin to win that game, and I felt pretty confident in that, especially when I saw Mertz suit up because we didn't know who was going to be out. But after that first interception, I was like, okay, this game is pretty much over because I trust Wisconsin as a front runner. I can't think of a better team in the country to be the front runner. They're built to be leading or be in a close game. They're not built to come from behind. So you can't spot them a lead. Like you can punt and be tied 0-0 and play a field position war and hope you get some stops. But you certainly can't give up essentially a pick six. Like it was so deep in the territory. It was essentially a pick six. And then another one. And it was over from there. But here's the thing. Wisconsin had 4 players rush for more than 65 yards, led by Jalen Berger, 15 carries for 87 yards and a touchdown. And they added up as a team for 341 rushing yards, and Michigan had 47. I mean, that is ridiculous. That is 7 times more roughly. And Michigan has the pieces to do it. Like Zach Charbonnet is a good running back. Hassan Haskins is a good running back. Joe Milton can scramble. Like I don't understand why they don't use that and they get behind the pins and then they have to throw. In this case, it made sense because they made errors early and Wisconsin really dominated from there. But in other games, and I think this is really they've lost their identity because that's what they used to do. And Wisconsin doesn't lose their identity. Paul Chryst is like, hey, we're going to run right through you and hit you with play action. And it works. And I think Wisconsin is a legit contender. Whether they can make it because they've had fewer games is to be determined. But I really believe in Wisconsin being one of the best teams in the country.
I agree. They have definitely shown nothing but dominance when they've been on the field. It's hard to knock them for having COVID issues when their state had just been pillaged by it for so many weeks. But what do we think about this Michigan team moving forward? They're now sitting at 1-3. There's has to be grumbles in everywhere in the country about how Jim Harbaugh's operating this team. What their performances have looked like. What do you like? What I say, Michigan. What comes to your mind right now?
Well, I think it's hard not to think Harbaugh because everyone's talking about like, oh, he's gone and his head's on a pike and everything. But I think I don't think he's doing a great job, and they haven't been prepared, and we've talked about that. But more than that, I wonder if it's just like, hey, there's no bowl games, once you lose a game here, and then you still have Ohio State and all these big guys to come. They knew that, and I wonder if the motivation's lacking for the team, and it's not all. And he's the scapegoat, and certainly he holds some fault, but I wonder if that's more of an issue. But yeah, no, I think Harbaugh's done, and you just have such expectations when you hear the name Michigan. You go to the Big House, the largest capacity stadium in the country, and obviously they don't have fans this year. But there's this aura around their program that you have to have, and they demand excellence, and they haven't had it. So I think he's gone, and Michigan may be in a rebuilding stage, similar to like what Texas has done in the past couple of years.
Yeah, it's really interesting to sit back and just examine what has happened so far this year. It's been a year like any other for a lot of different people, but you look at what's happened there with the Michigan program, they're just completely lost, in my opinion, right now. They're not doing what they usually do to have success. This is a team that kind of, if you were to look in previous years, this Wisconsin-Michigan matchup, you would be like, oh, this is going to be awesome, smash mouth Big Ten football. And coming out and throwing the ball early like they did, and then Milton makes 2 quick mistakes, and you're down 14-0, and it's just over. Like they didn't have an opportunity to even sniff competing in this football game, and that's just not something you say about Michigan a whole lot. You usually are talking about them competing with an Ohio State, and that's the biggest game usually in the Big Ten each year. Is that's the can't miss game is Michigan versus Ohio State, because who's going to win? Who's going to go to the Rose Bowl? Who's going to have the shot to make the playoff? And that just hasn't been the case these last few years for Michigan. It's usually they enter that game with a few losses, and they're trying to play spoiler against Ohio State to not let them play in the playoff. So I think there has to be a change at somehow. I don't know. Like we touched on, I don't know it's all Jim Harbaugh's fault, but he's clearly lost the locker room. He's clearly lost the trust of the team, and I think that's going to be the first step moving forward is him as no longer being the head coach of Michigan, and them moving in a different direction moving forward. Would you kind of agree with all of that? I guess we kind of
I think that's certainly got to be the move. You just have such, like I said, the expectations are so high, and then this is not even underwhelming. This is vastly underwhelming and underperforming.
Right. We talked about, we're going to move on to a couple different notes that we've seen throughout the slate of games this week that we didn't necessarily preview. Arizona entered this game without playing a game because they were scheduled to play Utah week 1. That got canceled. So they came into this game without playing, without showing any tape or anything, and they pushed number 20 USC to the brink. And that's the second straight week that USC's gone into their last final drive of the game with less than a minute left and scoring a touchdown to win. So what do we make of this USC team and kind of how they've been performing thus far? And are they going to be able to continue to play like this, or they're going to have to show a little bit more dominance on both sides of the football?
Yeah, no, I have been unimpressed by USC both weeks. And Keaton Slovis, who we thought was going to be the best quarterback in the Pac-12, and he still may well be, but like with that type of talent, you thought, okay, even if their defense isn't great, which, on paper doesn't look as good as it could be, their offense is going to score a ton each week. And so far, they've just, by the skin of their teeth, won on 2-minute drill drives. And they've been unimpressive to me. Like at number 20, they're lucky to be 1-1, and they're 2-0. And there's been 2 plays where the ball has been tipped and nearly picked that have ended up leading to touchdowns or being a touchdown. And, that's the difference in a season. They're 2-0, and they very easily could be 0-2. So I'm not convinced by USC at all, and they've got a matchup with a sneaky Colorado team this week that's 2-0, and that is kind of an eliminator game in the Pac-12 South. So I think it'll be really interesting to monitor, and I was impressed by Graham Gunnell, the quarterback for Arizona, though. Yeah,
it was a really intriguing matchup. I just think you can't rely on your team to score with a minute 40 left when each week and expect to win the football game. But then again, with that being said, is when Arizona scored with a minute 40 left, I was like, they just left them too much time. Like, that you just had this feeling that USC was going to make the plays that they needed to make to win the football game. And so it's a weird balance of expecting them to compete and expecting them to play well, but also like just kind of being very surprised at the situations that they continuously leave themselves in so far this season. So it's going to be interesting. They once again showed that they can make the plays to win the football game down the stretch, but I think head coach Clay Helton's going to sleep a little bit better at night if they're able to play a more complete game earlier in their games and build on some leads instead of trying to come back in the last 2 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. I was doing a little perusing on Twitter after that game, and a lot of people were like, wow, Clay, I'm kind of happy that Clay Helton and USC is able to pull these wins off, because you don't fire someone who's 2-0, but they so easily could be 0-2, and his head would be on a stick, just like Jim Harbaugh. And I was terrified as a fan of the Pac-12 that doesn't necessarily root for USC, that the rumors of Urban Meyer going there, and he could have them up there and being a Clemson and Alabama type so quickly. And so it's underwhelming compared to the recruits they get. You really expect better results. And I know they're 2-0, so you can't argue with the wins and losses, but you want a more demanding win, especially with only a 6-game schedule. You have to make statements to have a chance.
I think that's a really good point moving forward. Speaking of good recruiting, Oregon escaped a potential upset bid in Pullman over a newly faced Washington State Cougars team. That Oregon started pretty slow on offense. They were down in the first half, and they were able to kind of steal a touchdown away at the end of the first half with a deep ball to Jalen Redd, and then CJ. Travis Dye. someone punched it in for a touchdown to give the
I
Ducks.
think that was a don't. No, that was Verdell. You're right. Never mind.
Yeah, I don't. One of their talented running backs scored a touchdown to give them to put them down only by one score, like 2 points or something like that, going into halftime. So that was a huge momentum shift. They were down big going into halftime with all the momentum on the side of Washington State. Jalen Red gets behind the secondary, and a good throw would have been a touchdown, but they got them down to the 6-yard line or whatever, and they punched in to go into the half. So that was a big momentum shifter, and they're able to go to 2-0, winning, and it ended up winning handily, 43-29. But it was a bit of an underwhelming start for the Ducks there in Pullman.
Yeah, for sure. And it was a tale of two halves in two ways, but for both sides of the ball, because the offense, like you said, struggled in the first half, but because the offense was struggling in the first half, it put the defense in inclement conditions, really. And they played okay. They limited the damage, but Jaden DeLora, the quarterback for Washington State, which was so weird to watch watching Mike Leach for so long. I was like, wait, this is Washington State? I had to do a few double checks. But they did a good job, and then the second half, Oregon's offense started playing well, and Oregon's defense played well. This is the second half of football is the first time this season that I've said, oh wow, Oregon really could be a top 10 team. Like I voiced my skepticism against Stanford. They allowed 200 yards on the ground. Washington State doesn't really run a ton even without Leach there, but they were able to shore up tackles and not allow big plays, and their line offensively and defensively played well. So I was impressed with the second half, but they need to find a way to put it together for the full game. And I think Tyler Shuck really needs to develop quickly because this team has the caliber, but I'm not sure he's there yet because he hasn't had the starts, and he needs to mature more quickly than a lot of players have in past years.
Some interesting notes on this game is one is that Washington State is still a very scary threat in the Pac-12 North. They didn't really lose a whole lot. They looked very potent still on offense, and with this new QB, DeLora, he went to the same high school as Marcus Mariota and Tua Tagovailoa. So you hear those two names. They're one of them won Heisman. One of them won the Heisman Trophy, and the other one's now starting in the NFL. So you expect this guy to come in. He's a true freshman starting there at Washington State. He's got a couple years to develop, and I expect them to be a very solid team in the next few years, if not beating someone surprising this year, even so, because Washington State, their crossover game into the South is USC. So that's an interesting note to touch on there. That was a fun one there in the Pac-12 to watch after dark in that slot there on Fox. Northwestern improved to 4-0 on their season. They just knocked off Purdue, who that was their first loss of the season. That game was 27-20, so that was a good one there in the Pac-12. I'm sorry, in the Big Ten. Do we think this Northwestern team has what it takes sitting there at 4-0 to make a push at a Wisconsin team who's just continued to dominate both the teams that they've played so far this season, seeing as Wisconsin was so dominant?
I don't know if they'll be able to beat Wisconsin, but I think they won't be manhandled. Like, I think Wisconsin's got more talent up front and both sides of the ball. Offensively and defense is front seven, which is what Pat Fitzgerald is a former linebacker. That's what he's always stout. They're always extremely good defensively. They limit teams, but I just don't know if they have enough to score on Wisconsin, who's also of the same makeup. And I think Wisconsin just has better recruits and the same coaching philosophy. But I don't think they'll have a 49-11 type of game. I think they can limit it to, if their issue will be scoring points on Wisconsin more so than Wisconsin running down their throats, in my opinion. And I've been really impressed with Northwestern. I think that could be a close game, but I just think Wisconsin's a better team.
I would agree with that as well. Utah had their second straight game canceled due to COVID issues inside their program. We finally got some transparency on what's happening there. We had 17 still positive cases throughout the program, and 11 people either in isolation or quarantine due to exposure to people that had tested positive for the virus. There was a lot of grumbling on social media and things like that about why that LA County was the reason that the Utes weren't able to go and travel and play UCLA. That was just simply not true. It was the Utes that canceled the game on their end. And so this is a really intriguing thing to say that they still have 17 positive cases and that there was even a talk of them playing a football game this week is quite astounding to me and just seems a little a little sloppy and a little lack of ownership and things like that. And you could go on and on, at least in my opinion. What do you make of what's happening there here, I guess, here in Salt Lake City?
I agree with you. I mean, I thought it was silly to even want to go play the game. I mean, obviously you want to play the game for your players, but if you're at 53, 54, because, you know, you have to have 53 scholarship players and you're right on the line. And I think what happened was one player tested positive, and that put them below. And they were like, oh, it's one active one. So now we have to contact trace and everything got scrambled. But to have 28 players that are still in procedure, like at least 17 active, like you said, and 11 not currently with coronavirus, but still in quarantine. To me, it's ludicrous to want to play the football game. I mean, it wouldn't have gone well for Utah either. Like, what happens? That you get more people sick, both UCLA and yourselves. You play a game, you cause injuries by playing a short-staffed team. I honestly think it was the best thing that could happen to Utah to realize, hey, like, this was a horrible idea, and like we need to reassess and get healthy. And because health is paramount in football, even in a non-COVID-19 era. And this would have been a reckless decision. So I think it was the right decision first and foremost, and secondly, I think it would benefited both teams because UCLA was able to reschedule and play Cal, and they got a game off.
Yeah, and then when you look at this Utah team, I think we mentioned that they play Colorado next week, but it's actually Utah versus USC next week in the Pac-12 South. They play USC comes here to Salt Lake City to take on the Trojans, and that would normally be the Pac-12 South elimination game. That's gonna determine who wins the division. But we're not even sure if Utah's gonna be able to field a squad to take on USC in that game. And you look at this team, and then you look at what the heck happens if they can't even play USC, and then like if they were to come back and go like 2-0, and then what? You're gonna say, oh, that they can be the division champs? It's just gonna be so whack to kind of see what's happening, and I just think it's so foolish to even have the conversation of Utah playing games if they still have 17 players that have tested positive, and just like clearly the program is still. If you have a guy test positive on Friday, clearly it's still throughout the program, throughout the facility, throughout things like that. So there's now traces in the Utah men's basketball program, which I saw on Twitter. So it's just one of those things that seems very foolish to me, and it's hard to kind of get behind in that sense of things.
And one side note I wanted to add is it turns out we talked about two position groups decimated by injury. I'm not sure what the second one was, but we talked about what would be the most important other than quarterback. It turned out quarterback was one of the position groups that was decimated by injury. Utah was planning to start Britton Covey, who's a wide receiver. He's 5'9" and hasn't played quarterback since early in his high school career. So that would have been interesting to see in the first place, but also it just shows how ravaged the team is with COVID-19. And I think they rescheduled, actually. I think UCLA and Utah is happening this upcoming week, and USC and Colorado is happening because Arizona State had a case as well. But yeah, no, regardless of who Utah plays, it'll be interesting to see how they handle stuff because of the transparency or lack thereof that we've seen so far.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. Another side note on Utah cancellation, UCLA, the team they were supposed to play, was able to reschedule a game to play this weekend. They actually played today and beat Cal 34-10. So it was very clear that it wasn't the LA County UCLA issue. It was they were able to reschedule a game, play a game, and beat Cal and beat them very dominantly and very impressively. So that's just a very intriguing situation here at the University of Utah, and it's one of those things that just seems very mismanaged and very poorly judged, and some better leadership is needed in my opinion moving forward to have a cooler head of saying maybe we don't play this week if we have 17 positive cases still. So
yep, I could not agree more.
So moving forward, a little bit more positive news. Liberty and Marshall remain undefeated on their seasons. They're now 8-0 and 7-0 respectively. Liberty beat Western Carolina and Marshall beat Middle Tennessee to improve to those totals. So they should hold serve in their rankings this week to to stay around the 16 and 23-ish, 20 area in the polls. So good to see some Cinderella stories continue to play well and continue to beat the teams that they're supposed to beat, even Liberty after coming off of that win against Virginia Tech.
Yeah, and Virginia Tech's no slouch. They played Miami tight. That was a tough game, and it was 25-24 Miami in Blacksburg. I'm impressed by Liberty. They showed, hey, we were for real. We can beat anyone, and Marshall as well. And it was a fun little tribute to the plane crash that happened, I think 50 or 75 years ago. They wore jerseys to commemorate that. So kudos to Marshall.
Absolutely. Let's talk about another team who's undefeated. Cincinnati manhandled East Carolina this week, 55-17. That 17 points is the most they've allowed this season since week 1 when they took on Appalachian State and gave up 20. That's an impressive stat in amongst itself when you've seen the teams that they've played. What can Cincinnati do if they can do anything more than they've already done to make a bigger statement to the polls that they're deserving of a higher ranking? Or do you think they're going to just continue to kind of hold serve and be left behind some of these Floridas and Texas A&Ms and teams like that are a little bit ahead of them?
I mean, they've won by at least 3 touchdowns. I think 4, if my math's correct off the top of my head, for 4 scores at least. In 4 straight weeks in the American where teams score a lot of points. That's crazy to win by that much because they're not scoring 80 points a game, which was where the American, like Memphis, averages high 30s. And so it's crazy. I don't think they can do anything more, honestly. I think they have to hope for Texas A&M or Florida to lose because there's just more value put on their wins than there are on Cincinnati's, and it's evident in the polls.
Speaking of wins, my guy, you went 8-0 this week in pick. How about that? So last week I took a 2-game lead in the picks, and you decided to go 8-0 on me and erase that deficit real quick.
I had to get back. I had some games I felt like I could get the upset picks in on, and both some teams came out and performed and shot me in the face and like no. And then COVID-19 came in and spoiled a few of my upset picks. I mean, maybe they would have won anyway, but I would have liked to see a few star players play in those games, and so I'm happy to have a good week after a disappointing week last week.
8-0, very impressive. Well done, my friend. I went 6-2, and so that makes us both at 26-11 so far on the season. We're back tied and even. But let's take a moment to pat ourselves on the back. 26-11 is 70% accuracy. So in college football, I'm going to take that as at least a B+, and shows some legitimacy that we kind of have an idea of what we're getting into here when we're talking about these things.
And we're not taking just the easy games. We're taking the big games of the week. So I'm happy with it too.
Yeah, absolutely. So kudos to us, and that's gonna wrap up our episode for you this evening. We're gonna be back with you all on Tuesday. We'll talk rankings, we'll talk news, we'll talk all that good stuff, that anything that you guys want to hear. Anything along those lines at all. It's our news episode, so we're able to be a little bit more flexible and delve into some topics that we want to hear covered. We're going to try and give you a little bit more transparency on COVID-19 rulings and things like that. I'm going to try and do some extensive research and see what teams and different programs are doing. So watch out for that moving forward for Tuesday. And do you have anything else to add, Leif, before we sign off?
I think just keep listening and tell your friends about it. They like college sports, and speaking of college sports, college basketball starting up on November 25th. So we'll have a preview out for you by the latest of next week, previewing the feast week games. And I know we can't wait, and hope you guys are excited as well.
Alrighty, that's going to do it for Leif and I this evening. Thanks so much again for tuning in to the College Sports Hive, and we will see you all on Tuesday. All right, everyone, take care.
Thank you.